Our SuperSlicer video recently took off, and so many of you are looking for a deeper dive into SuperSlicer. Well, I finally got the latest version. Let's take a look at it. Let's just start here real quick. The last video that we did all about SuperSlicer, we'll card to it there, was just an initial kind of sprinkling SuperSlicer magic, but recently Teaching Tech decided to do a similar video, and, well, a lot of you came flooding in, asking for more. And I'm ready to do this. I have definitely not given SuperSlicer the chance it deserves, and one of those big reasons is because I can't just take my SuperSlicer stuff and bring it into here, just like straight up copy profiles in. It doesn't work because some of the nomenclature is different between them. So if you're using SuperSlicer and you want to go then to use SuperSlicer, just understand it's going to be a bit tough to get through. Now, I've been using SuperSlicer 2.4, now the beta version, for a little bit now, and so I'm going to compare a lot of the features that are discussed in that software to SuperSlicer. If you don't know what I'm talking about, we covered SuperSlicer 2.4 Alpha 1 here. You can take a look at that. That is getting very close to a release candidate, and I am really excited for that. But when you just take a look at it on the surface, SuperSlicer is just kind of a blue SuperSlicer, right? It looks pretty much the same, right? This is all kind of what you expect from SuperSlicer. The menus are slightly different, but that's okay. But otherwise, right, there's not a whole lot of difference between them. But oh buddy, is there ever a ton? Let's take a look at this. The big thing here, and the thing I want to touch on first, calibration. If you are having trouble calibrating your printer for whatever reason, and we cover lots of calibration issues in Print Fail Friday, the entire series will card to it up there so you guys can take a look at that as well. SuperSlicer makes this easy. One of the most dreaded things, and even I hate doing them, are temp towers. When you're trying out a new brand of filament or a new type of filament, or maybe you're not getting the prints that you're looking for, it's time to do a temp tower. But the previous versions of SuperSlicer only had a couple small little calibration things. Now we've got a ton. And we can see it walks you through with a whole introduction about the printer calibration, extruder, bed leveling, filament, filament flow, filament temperature, slicer, bridge flow, ironing, calibration cube. Good Lord, how many things can he say in one breath? But the one that is particularly difficult is going to be things like filament temperature. And it's literally going to generate a temp tower. All right, and it even gives you pictures of what you can look at. Now, I would say that these photos are a little bit outdated. Okay, we have some Z banding here. You guys could go for some new photos. Hit me up if you want us to contribute some new ones. That would be fun. But it even tells you what everything is. So we say this is the number of tests with lower temperature than the current one, number of tests with it above. So this would be a 5 test, 210 in the middle. Yeah. And then steps are increments of 10 degrees. We can generate it. And there you go. That is your temp tower. And this temp tower has all of the work that you would need. So it's got the temperature changes, but they make it really simple to add in whatever calibration prints you're looking for. And if you don't want it, hit delete. Let's just go through. So initially, you've got built-in G-code preview. Now, SuperSlicer does this as well, but it's not up in that icon area, that toolbar up at the top. Same thing with slice preview. They're normally down here. So if I hit Control Z and bring this back, we can slice it, and this will give me my G-code preview, but I can go to slice preview as well, and it will show me, variations of the different things that are being used. So if you are someone that likes to look more at the G-code view, you got that option as well. But let's get rid of that because we don't need that where we're going. We're going to go in here into print settings, and if you'll notice something, holy crap. When we go into the settings for SuperSlicer, we notice this is Prusa Slicer on steroids. So if you are a power user or somebody with control problems, SuperSlicer, you're going to love it because a lot of this is typical for what you would see inside of Prusa Slicer. Now, let me pull up Prusa Slicer 2.4 Alpha 1. Let's take a look at this real quick. Same area, okay, but way less settings, all right? You feel me? That's basically what you need to know about SuperSlicer. If you want to have the utmost control of your printing, SuperSlicer is generally the way to do it. Now, have they implemented a lot of the new features found in SuperSlicer 2.4? I'm excited to find out because I honestly don't know. I haven't read any of their release notes. I think it's just way more fun to deep dive into it. But back to the calibration, I mean, literally even things like ironing. And as someone that has struggled with ironing, there's really no good way to test ironing. SuperSlicer has entered the chat. I think we got this. There are also a ton more printer profiles. So if we go to configuration and bring up the wizard, there are tons of different printers, okay? So you've got everything like Anycubic, Artillery, Bebo, all the custom printers. Oh man, those are old Mendels. Woo! Creality, of course, and my assumption is that these are going to be based on community, but they may not be. This is actually pretty interesting. Of course, there's Lulzbot. Oh, nothing from the 289 or 747. Lots of stuff from Prusa, of course, because if it wasn't immediately clear, this is based on Prusa Slicer, which is then based on Slick 3R, which we opted not to cover. It's a slicer that hasn't been updated in many years and is very outdated. But Prusa Slicer, of course, has its own dedicated team. Such does SuperSlicer. So you tend to see them trading blows back and forth for who is number one at the time. Even Deltas, look at that. Some weird, basically Prusa printer Viagra combination thing. Vorons, of course. Vorons. That's all I got to say about Vorons. And lots of filaments, of course, from more brands than what you will see inside of Prusa Slicer. We're going to check for it, and we're also going to add our update presets. So inside of these settings, now again, you've got your simple, your advanced, and your expert. Simple is simple, but I think, again, what we said in the previous video on SuperSlicer, I think simple is, like, if you're in SuperSlicer, you're probably not looking at simple. Like, just straight up, you're likely at least an advanced user. More likely, you're going to say, oh, I want all of the settings. So you're going to go ahead and click expert. We initially see some settings that might catch you a little bit off guard. Only one perimeter on top surfaces. We have extra perimeters on overhangs or on odd layers. This is actually pretty cool that you can add extra perimeters on overhangs, which is great if you want to make sure that your infill sticks. Give it more perimeters so that you're dealing less with zigzags across the open bridge versus doing straight lines across that overhang, which should viably give you a better look of the exterior of your part. So definitely a awesome feature to have there, something that of course is not present inside of Prusa Slicer. For the odd layers, it adds one perimeter to every odd layer. With this, infill is taken into the sandwich, and you might be able to reduce drastically the infill perimeter overlap settings. I have never personally played with that setting. I think that normal settings do just fine, and of course it is off by default. Ensure vertical shelf thickness. I would generally leave that on. You want to make sure that your parts have the correct shell thickness. That's good. And we also see this enforce 100% fill volume, which is an experimental option that modifies fill flow to have the exact amount of plastic for that infill pattern. If you have ever dealt with top layers and you're noticing there's a little bit of plastic that isn't flowed to where it needs to be, that is your answer, my darlings. But seriously, I really don't know a better way to describe this other than SuperSlicer for control freaks. And it really is that slicer that you never knew about, that when you saw, you're like, oh. Because ultimately, it allows you that finite control that other slicers just simply don't. And those of you that like the Prusa style of slicing, where everything is set out into menus that are relatively easy to find, may not like the Cura interface, and probably ultimately quite the opposite for Cura people, right? But if you are a Prusa person and you like the idea of SuperSlicer, you like the way that it's laid out, you are going to love SuperSlicer. Under slicing, it is a bit of what we've been used to. We see some extra things for filtering, for the resolution and model rounding precision. Slice gap closing radius is pretty typical of 0.049, but this will allow you to basically reduce the amount of resolution that your model has. So if it's a really, really high poly model, you want to make it low poly, modify that resolution to play around. But this is awesome where you can do curve smoothing, XY compensation, and this is not just your standard XY compensation. So normally inside of Simplify 3D, this is called horizontal size compensation. It's what I've always called it, so I've always called it horizontal size comp. But XY compensation expands or contracts your part in the X and Y dimension by a set amount. And inside of SuperSlicer, you get to choose between outer and inner. So if you're doing something with a mortise and tenon where you need a pin to go up into a hole of a part, you might want to do an inner XY compensation to be a little bit larger than it currently is. Now, which way you need to do it, figure that one out. It will depend on your model, whether you're doing an outside or an inside hole. But ultimately, this is that finite control, because if I want to just expand a hole ever so slightly, but I don't want to expand the exterior dimensions of my product, SuperSlicer is literally the only way to go, unless I go back to the drawing board and make changes inside of my model. Under Infill, we get, again, kind of the same, but turned up to 11.
These go to 11.
And we see that, you know, normal infill is lots of options, of course, but stock is going to be gyroid under the quality, similar to what you get inside of SuperSlicer. I don't notice immediately any in here that are not offered inside of SuperSlicer, so that's great to see. And we have options for connected to whole perimeters, connected to outer perimeters, and not connected. And their explanation here says, give to the infill algorithm if the infill needs to be connected and on which perimeters. Can be useful for art or with high infill / perimeter overlap. The result may vary between infill types. But okay, I'm just gonna leave it connected. I don't really know where that would be useful, but sure. Yeah, maybe. Ironing on the top, we've got other options, of course. Normally, it's going to be monotonic or ironing. I'm a monotonic guy. I know that a lot of people like ironing, but especially if you're printing in silk filaments, those silky, bright filaments like this, ironing doesn't work great. It actually completely, in my experience, removes the smooth look and shininess. So this is from a previous project that we did. This is silk gold filament. If you notice, it's not all that shiny. And yet we turn it over to the other side where there wasn't ironing. This was the bottom layer, okay? There's another piece that goes over it to basically make the same thing on both sides. If you are in the Southeast United States and you know this logo, it is for Publix. We did a trophy for them a couple of months ago, but this side it's plenty shiny. This side it is not because of ironing. So a little catch there that caught me. I'm like, oh, ironing will look great, except it seems to remove your shininess of the silk filaments, so be careful there. Bottom rectilinear, I'm probably gonna go with monotonic. It's just nicer, honestly. This is all pretty standard here, the combined infill for every layer. If you are trying to do something with really thick infill, let's say you got a big nozzle on there and you want to lay down some infill, you can combine infill every couple of layers. Or if this is just something that is a draft piece, you could go ahead and add only infill where needed, which is pretty awesome. And I do like their supporting dense layer. I don't believe this is a setting inside of SuperSlicer, but that's not too difficult for us to go and find. No, it is not. This is a great little option, and it is especially useful if you want to use very, very, very low infill numbers, like 5% or less, but you don't want your top layers to suffer. You can basically add supporting dense layers, okay? There you go. Good options there. I definitely love that. Under advanced, you can do solid infill every certain amount of layers, especially useful, again, if you're not going to have a lot of infill, but you still want to have some strength. Solid infill every, X amount of layers should be great. And of course, you get to choose your angle for your infills, for your bridging, and your increment. But apparently it's still experimental. Never used it. No clue. Of course, we've got the only retract when crossing perimeters. That means that only when your printer is moving across perimeters does it retract filament back into the nozzle. This is very common, especially on printers with really long Bowden tubes, that it doesn't matter if it ends up kind of leaving little blobs and such inside of your infill, it gets covered anyways, and it reduces the risk of filament grinding. So if you do have a printer that has a tendency to grind filament, that might not be a bad option for you, but before you go down that route, I highly recommend that you look at tuning that retraction, and if your retraction is as low as you think it can go, look at adjusting your temperature and your cooling when you're doing these retractions. Because if you're running PLA at 215, but it also runs fine at 200, you will need to retract more, and you will have more problems with retracting at 215 than you will at 200 if it runs fine at both of those temperatures. Something to take note there. And again, of course, we've got some extra settings here for the ironing post-process and advanced infill options. Again, really only mess with these if you really want to dial things in or have a bit of fun. Skirt and brim, this was something that changed in SuperSlicer 2.4 that I was so happy to see. That you can choose your brim width, your interior brim width, you can add brim ears, and of course you can have a brim offset. Something that does bother me about SuperSlicer is that it has a stock brim offset of 0.1 millimeter. That means your brim doesn't touch your part, and I spent longer than I care to admit trying to figure out why my brim wasn't touching my part when it was just a brim offset. So if you're using SuperSlicer 2.4, the alpha or the betas, make sure that you have that change. I don't know if that's going to be changed in the final release, but I am glad to see that inside of SuperSlicer, stock is 0, because that's where it should be. And remember, skirt flows around you, brim attached to your hat. So brim is attached to your part, skirt flows around your part. Now, of course, you could add a bunch of brim offset and it effectively becomes a skirt. So, there's that. And I believe if you do 0 distance from an object on a skirt, it then also becomes a brim. Something to note, though, if you want a brim with multiple layers, you might be able to do a 0 distance skirt with multiple height there. I have not personally tried this. If you need something with multiple layers of brim, look at having a much larger brim or look at enclosing your printer, because you're likely printing a material that requires that extra adhesion. You can also look at doing brim ears. This is something that I was very happy to see inside of SuperSlicer. Let's check real quick if SuperSlicer has it. Again, this is Alpha 1. It's what I've been running for a couple of weeks now. I have the beta one, but I just haven't switched over to it. I do not see ears. Maybe it's in the beta, but that's okay. Ears are really, really nice. And what is a brim ear, Grant? Well, at the corners of your parts, it will have a jut out with more brim. A brim ear. You know, like the mouse that we don't talk about or say its direct name on video that's in Kissimmee, Florida. Inside of support material, this is about the same. Let's just generate it so we can ungray a lot of those options. And this is pretty similar to what I'm used to seeing inside of SuperSlicer. I don't know why RAF still exists. This is a part from an IDEX printer that we're going to be reviewing very soon from We Do 3D. I can't get the part off the damn raft, so that's going to be in the video. Make sure you get subscribed if you want to learn more about IDEX printing. Independent dual extruder. IDEX. It's pretty darn cool. Now, I do like that they give you options, right? So we could do Z offset from filament, from plane, or soluble. And I like that there's options for both top and bottom. If we do from plane, see if it tells us the difference here. From plane, it uses the plane Z, same as from filament if no bridge is extruded. Okay, well that's actually really nice. I like that feature. Again, SuperSlicer, but with extra features. Wrap sheath around support. I made this mistake many moons ago. Unless you are having massive problems with your support falling off your part, don't click that button. It makes your support effectively indestructible, but it also makes it effectively indestructible and really difficult to get out from your part. I am bummed to see that we don't get the Snug supports here. Snug supports are so amazing, and it is what has enabled me to uninstall Simplify 3D. Simplify 3D had one of the best support generation algorithms out there, where SuperSlicer had a tendency to truncate support through parts. Now, with SuperSlicer's Snug support feature, it only generates support right where it needs it, rather than these big rectilinear lines that can end up going through your model. Something to note there. I would love to see SuperSlicer enable these Snug supports, even if you just pull it right from SuperSlicer. They're pretty amazing. And like, for that reason alone, I think I might stick with SuperSlicer. That's a bit of a bummer to see that while SuperSlicer does enable all of this extra feature, it does not enable Snug supports. And that's really a bummer, because I really, really love Snug supports. To give you guys an idea of what Snug supports look like, we're going to slice a file real quick. That's going to be a tough one. We're going to go to Snug. This is for a client, and if you guys remember the Ender 3 Pro video that we did, we'll card to that as well. This is the final part that we had to print to verify the printer would work. Well, let's see what this looks like with Snug supports. From the top down, you see basically no support whatsoever, because it is only where it's needed. And for something like a Voronoi pattern, that's this Swiss cheese hole pattern that you see, this entire thing would have been full of support. Now, I will tell you, you can print this without support material, so just don't do this because you'll never get it out. But if this was grid support, and let's just quickly change it to grid, you're gonna see how much crazier this is. It's a big freaking difference. And we can see that, yes, the grid supports don't take up a ton of space, but boy howdy, just look at all this extra support material on the outside that you don't need. And from the top down, there's lots of extra material used. We're seeing 38.5 grams and 7 hours and 6 minutes. And if we go back to Snug with no other setting changes, we are down 8 grams of filament, but more importantly, almost an entire hour of 3D printing. So yeah, Snug supports for life. For life. And of course, they give you lots of options for your support material interface, whether you want rectilinear, monotonic, concentric, Hilbert, sawtooth, or ironing. Why you would want ironing on your support material interface, I don't know. Maybe there's some secret that I'm not aware of. But yes, awesome options. Bit of a bummer to not see the Snug supports. Inside of Speed, I really, truly believe that this is the way that SuperSlicer should be. I love seeing all of these options right where you want to see them. Okay, for Speed, you've got your default and your external. Inside of SuperSlicer, it's very similar, but it's not as clear, right? So you've got your perimeters, your small perimeters, and your external perimeters. Okay, in SuperSlicer, you got your default and your external. Right there, easy to get, and they're next to each other, so you know that it's involving perimeters. I prefer that more. That way you don't end up putting the wrong thing in the wrong area, if that makes sense. Now, from what I see, we're not getting the option for that small perimeter range, and that is pretty useful when you're dealing with very fine detail components to slow down that move so that it gives the printer enough time to do the extrusion and enough time to actually slow down and cool everything off. Infill Speed, we've got a difference between our sparse and our solid. Now, understand, sparse does not mean little to no infill. It means anything that is not solid in this particular case. Sparse infill is what is used in industry. So I'm saying in the big boy 3D printers, the ones that cost like houses worth of money. They use the term sparse. So it is interesting to see that they've utilized it here. And of course, we've got sparse infill speed, solid infill speed, and top solid. Top solid, of course, you always want to be a little bit slower so that you get those nice, clean, crisp, beautiful top layers that everybody likes to see. Options again for your support, normal printing, and your interface. The interface is that material. We can show it easily here. Those interface layers are the dark green that you see. And what I've done here is I've just basically turned off everything else on the part. It all comes back pretty easy, but makes it easier for us to show you what's going on. Of course, we've got our modifiers for our default, first layer speed, and infill. I talked about this in the last SuperSlicer video. I love that they let you modify the amount of speed for your infill. You really want to make sure those perimeters are laid down perfectly, but ultimately the infill connects to the perimeters. So you can run that a little bit faster and be totally safe. In SuperSlicer, you can't do that. You gotta kind of choose one speed and you stick with it. Of course, I called it out earlier saying they don't have something for small perimeters, and oops, Grant didn't read further down. They do have it. And this one allows you to really set how small perimeters are determined. That is 6 millimeters or less with a max length of 20. It will be a speed of 25 millimeters a second. So it's nice to see. I think I would have preferred to see that up under perimeter speed, but I understand that it's under modifiers. That does make a little bit of sense. This is common. This is fine. Auto speed is pretty darn cool. It enables the printer to just say, I'm gonna set this for you, dog. You don't gotta bother with it. I got this. Well, Stefan from CNC Kitchen just did a video all about a brand new nozzle from Bondtech that has flow rates that are through the roof, like 40 millimeters cubed per second on an E3D V6. A normal V6 nozzle is only good for like 15 millimeters cubed per second. So if you're running one of those really amazing Bondtech nozzles, all you got to do is just set your auto speed for whatever you want it to be for your flow rate, set your maximum print speed, and it will just calculate everything else on its own. Now, understand, it's experimental, so, you know, use at your own risk. Inside of width and flow, like rhythm and flow, but not, we've got effectively what you'd be used to seeing, although you get an extra option there for skirt, which is pretty cool. Do love that. But there's this odd option for spacing that I'm honestly not so sure what to do with. I've never seen this until now. It says like default extrusion width, but spacing is the distance between two lines. You can set either spacing or width, and the other will be calculated using the perimeter overlap percentages and default layer height. Okay, so it's just been automatically calculated for us because of the overlap percentage. So if we change this to 50%, oh, I figured that would auto update. I guess it doesn't. Okay, well, that's fine. We've got some perimeter overlaps, externals, and gap fills, bridge overlap. I would honestly leave a lot of this stuff stock unless you're dealing with some spacing in between your infill. But if you're dealing with that, you might want to look at tuning your steps per millimeter. If you guys don't know what that is, we did talk about it in the Ender 3 Pro video. It's linked down in the description as well. But I should probably be doing a full video on that, both the old school way with the ruler and some filament, and the new school way with some fancy math and stuff. I like the old school way, it just works. And we can see that we have options to modify the flow rate for bridges, above the bridges, top fill, and first layer, as well as cutting corners. Activate this option to modify the flow to acknowledge that the nozzle is round and that corners will have a round shape. And so change the flow to realize that and avoid over extrusion. 100% is activated, 0% is deactivated, and 50% is half activated. That might be a fun one to play with. There are, again, a lot of options here that you just don't need, right? Especially if you're running it with like a Prusa printer. If you're running it with something like an Ender 3 or a CR10 or one of the other budget-friendly 3D printers, you might mess around with these just for the sole purpose of doing it. And if you're the type of person that likes messing around, do it! Freaking do it! Dude, we are still in print settings. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Similar to what we see inside of SuperSlicer, the multiple extruders area is roughly the same. Don't mess with this if you don't have multiple extruders. Real simple, but if you do, all the stuff should be relatively self-explanatory, including the wipe towers and everything like that, because as you're changing nozzles, you need to make sure that you're wiping through the colors, make sure that you don't have any extra ooze as well. Output options, pretty much the same that we see inside of SuperSlicer, but there are processes to allow milling, which is pretty cool. I love that SuperSlicer can both be a G-code for 3D printing and G-code for milling. I've never tried it, but I do need to get one of our smaller CNC mills operational. That might be a fun way to mess around with it. And of course, you can add any post-processing scripts that you want to do whatever you need it to do. Notes and dependencies are what you would expect. Notes are where you can type things out. It saves for you and really nothing else. And dependencies are allowing you to enable compatible printers for this and not for ones that aren't compatible. Inside of the filament settings is basically some of the stuff you'd expect to see in SuperSlicer. Actually, I'm fairly certain it's the exact same thing. No. Okay. Well, there are some extra options, but I know things like, oh, hey, it's got a chamber option. Ooh, that's really nice. That's really nice. I like chamber options. Filament properties. Oh, you could do a shrinkage, gentlemen. That's pretty interesting. So it will auto account for shrinkage. If you are using ABS or polycarb, that's a really nice feature. Dang. You basically got to print some cal cubes, verify the amount of shrinkage in a percentage. Oh, dude. But normally under advanced, yeah, advanced is where I would find things like volumetric flow rates, which they're saying is 8 for PETG, which I think is pretty standard as well. Huh. All right, so it is just a little bit more simple, which is actually kind of nice that it's aligned this way. And oh yeah, if you've got a chamber, and this is something that Stratus has previously had under patent, the patent's recently expired. That was a video we did a long time ago. It's all card to it. That is a amazing feature to have if you have it. Oh, extra fan control. I love extra fan control. OnlyFans joke here. I don't know. God. My jokes are just as bad as my segue to our sponsor, 3D Musketeers. If you want to get your ideas out of your head and into your hands with full art-to-part, rapid prototyping, and product development, and I'm serious, like full art-to-part, I mean napkin sketches, ideas over the phone, to products in your hand, with patents, trademarks, copyrights, all that fun stuff, we can help you out here at 3D Musketeers. And whether you just need a little bit of help or you need a lot of help, we can guide you through this kind of dark valley that is inventing. It is pretty awesome, and I love working with inventors. So if you have an idea that you want to get out there and not have the ghost of Billy Mays talk about on late night television, hit us up. 3D Musketeers, links will be in the description down below. But boy, this is great. So you've got your default fan speed, your bridging fan speed, which is typical. This is typical inside a SuperSlicer that you got that control. But you can control your fan speed for your top layers, your external perimeters, which if you're doing something like ABS, you might want to turn off that fan for your external perimeters, but have it on ever so slightly for your interior stuff. That way, you know that stuff is at least reasonably solidified. The disabled fan for the first X amount of layers is typical. Full fan speed after X amount is typical as well. Enabling fan if layer print time is below X amount of seconds, typical as well. We can see that inside of SuperSlicer. If we go into cooling, we see that there is a lot that is similar, but you get lots of extra control as well. So great to see that. Love to see that. Multimaterial is oh, well, there is no multi-material option in here, so that's not going to work. But this does seem to be set up for a tool changer, which is great because it can keep tools at the ready at a lower temperature or slightly below where they would start to ooze to enable them to be ready, willing, and able to print quickly. This is not something that we play with all that often, but now having an IDEX printer, we might start messing around with this. Although, I don't know, didn't see an IDEX profile, so maybe we'll have to make one. That should be a fair bit of fun. Filament overrides are kind of what you would expect here. This is so if you are using a particular type of filament that needs something a little special that does not coincide with what Extruder 1 says here, you can do overrides inside of your filament profile itself. So we have a TPU, it's actually still loaded, the white TPU back there, that likes to print at 250C, where our black TPU likes to print at 240C. If you print the white at 240, it's not going to work. It's going to wrap around your extruder and you're going to have a bad time. Ask me how I know. And that's great because I can then save it as an additional type of filament that I can easily and quickly find and slice for and not make these mistakes over and over and over again. But this is also really great for things like silk PLAs that can be a little bit more finicky regarding their retraction because as they cool, they shrink quite considerably. I'll have to get some footage of that for you guys one day to show you when you're purging out silk. It will then pull itself back up because as it cools, it shrinks a little bit. But this is, of course, nice to see. Pretty typical, I think. See, we got extra wipe for external perimeters. That is nice to see. But I think that is our only difference. Yep, that's our only difference. The extra before wipe. Custom G-code, notes, and dependencies. We've been over that. Pretty simple stuff. Inside of the actual printer itself, you're getting a little bit more control, but ultimately it's going to come down to what printer you're looking at. If you use the Mark III's, and I guess I should do that over here too. So let me move over to the stock Mark III's. We're going to discard all of that stuff because we do not care. Under general, we see that SuperSlicer does give you more options, and it looks like they've actually removed things like the bed shape, which is kind of interesting. You've got options for milling cutters, you've got options for single extruder multi-material, which is cool, so that's like for an MMU. G-code flavor, of course, you have your options for Marlin, it supports stealth mode, supports remaining time, all that fun stuff. And you can even add precision for the G-code that you get significant figures. So your XYZ decimals are 3 and extruder decimals are 5. I said significant figures, and all you chemists out there either were exclaiming in joy or cussing at me under your breath. I think that depends where you are in your career. Of course, for the cooling fan, you've got settings for speed up time as well as a kickstart duration. I believe that will set the fan. Yep, it'll set the fan to max speed for a certain amount of time before going back down to the desired speed. Sometimes on these cheaper fans or larger fans, putting it to 10% will not get it to actually start. You'll need to kick it up to 100 and then quickly bring it back down to 10 so that it's still moving with the inertia of 100, and then the 10 can keep it rolling. That's a really nice feature to see. It's a feature that was in Simplify 3D, but is not actually supported inside of regular PrusaSlicer. So if that is an issue that you see in your printer, SuperSlicer is going to be the perfect option for you. And I think that's kind of where SuperSlicer fits, right? If PrusaSlicer isn't right for you, because there are features that you need that Cura has, that Simplify 3D has, that PrusaSlicer doesn't, SuperSlicer probably has it. So you get that same interface without all the BS. The rest of this is pretty basic. And when I say pretty basic, I mean self-explanatory, not easy to understand. Some of that's quite complicated. Now, here is something that's interesting. It says to tell the printer the latest firmware is 3.9.3. Except it's not. It's 3.10.0. So this has not been updated, and that's okay. It's really easy to tell your printer, hey, instead of 3.9, you're actually running 3.10.0. And if it's not there, it'll give you a little warning on the screen saying, hey, I'm not the right firmware. Just so you're aware, it'll still print. It's fine. Under machine limits, my guess is these are going to be relatively the same. They absolutely are, I think, reasonably the same. X, Y, Z, and E. And we've got maximum acceleration while traveling. That's an added one that we have here for SuperSlicer. Otherwise, yep, exactly the same. Extruder 1, let's see real quick. More options. Were you expecting anything different? More options in here. You can even name the tools. This is great if you have something like a mutant from Wham Bam, which, by the way, get subscribed. We're going to be doing an unboxing of the Wham Bam mutant coming soon because I got a couple of printers that could use some mutants. Yeah, excited for this one. But that's great if you have multiple tool heads because you can name them. And I think I've got 4 tool heads, and you know what that means.
Tool head.
I love that they allow for temperature offsets and extruder fan offsets. That is effectively, if you say that it's 215 and you know, like maybe you're running a hardened steel nozzle, and hardened steel nozzles need to be 10 or 15 C above, just set the extruder temp offset to be 10 or 15 C above, and all it's going to do is just add it. It's awesome. That enables you to not have custom materials for different nozzles. You just have different tool heads or different settings inside of the printer itself. Because let's be real, we don't change nozzles all that much. I mean, we should, but the E3D Revo is only now just starting to become a thing, which we did do a video all about. It'll be down in the description, but make sure you guys get subscribed because I did a 2.5 hour long interview with the man, the myth, the legend, Sanjay Mortimer himself, the founder and president of E3D, and that was an absolute blast where we get to meet the ever elusive Heatbreak. And no, not talking about this heat break. I'm talking about Sanjay's heat break. And that was a lot of fun. We're going to be releasing that in a few different parts in the next coming week, so keep an eye out for that. I love, again, that we have the option for the extra wipe on external perimeters. That is so nice to see. I really wish SuperSlicer had this because it doesn't, and it upsets me. We can see that the retraction, de-retraction are listed next to each other. I do like this quite a bit. If you set it to 0, of course, it uses the retraction speed as your de-retraction speed. We can also enforce the lift Z on the first layer. I do recommend that you do that. I always want Z hop enabled. I know that that might result in a slightly lower quality first layer, but I'm okay with that if my nozzle doesn't smack into my first layer, because my first layer isn't perfect. My steps per millimeter aren't set perfectly. My extrusion width is too little or too much. There's so many ways that your extruder can slam into your print, ruining it. I'd much rather enable Z-hop everywhere. It's just easier, in my opinion. But yeah, notes and dependencies, exactly what you guys would expect. That's really about it for SuperSlicer. I want to see about paint on supports. We're going to pull in that exact same Pac-Man Ghost because I've got it somewhere else. Now, it is telling us that it needs to be auto-repaired. Do you not offer auto-repair anymore? I guess not. Normally, you can right-click on the little angry triangle and it will automatically fix it, but I don't think we're gonna get that. Okay, fine. If we look at paint on supports, this is the old style of paint on supports. This is not yet from SuperSlicer 2.4. We can auto set by angle, I don't know, 22. You can hit enforce. That is not my preference. My preference is the way that it's done here. So we go to your paint on supports. So what we can do here is we can have it highlight everything where it wants support. And I'm gonna say, well, I want support here and back there, and I don't want any there, so I'm not gonna click it. You know, maybe a little bit there would be fine, a little bit there is probably fine. And you can go around and choose it, and it just kind of gives you a paint by numbers. Then you can choose to put it where you want it, and choose not to put it where you don't. So this is still the old style. It's fine. SuperSlicer 2.4, of course, is still in beta, so, you know, to be expected. But I think really what makes SuperSlicer so powerful is not only the calibration, but, dude, you can actually generate FreeCAD Python scripts. Like, you can literally put in FreeCAD Python scripts, and it will just work. I think really it's all about the calibration. And I love, 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 love that we have like extruder retraction calibrations. If you use SuperSlicer for nothing else, holy bejesus Joseph Prusa, you gotta use it. You gotta use SuperSlicer for its calibration. It gives you everything about how it's done. We can do one test and I can click generate. Boom. I think it's already in there. Is it? Oh, I got rid of my model, so something to note there. So all this is doing is just modifying the retraction. This is pretty darn cool. So when we go to slice it, oh, ha! Support still enabled. Let's get rid of that. Let's reslice it. Real fast on the slicing side, by the way. I'm curious. SuperSlicer is not using every one of the cores, but, you know, it's running quite well. This is a great little test for retraction. Inside of G-code preview, I can have it show the retractions and the travel moves. So this is where your strings might be. So you can see it's doing that nice X with the square around it. Really, really love that. So if you are having issues with retraction, give this a shot. Seriously. Anyways, I'd love to know, is there anything you all want to see me dive into a little bit deeper inside of SuperSlicer? This again was one of those, maybe not 30,000 foot level, but we're maybe now down at the 5,000 foot level, explaining more of the nitty gritty of what is SuperSlicer. SuperSlicer. Anyways, I'd love to know your opinions all about SuperSlicer. Let me know down in those comments. I'd love to be able to talk about this more, but I don't know what you guys want to see. I just got lots of requests for a deep dive, deep dive, deep dive, deep dive. Okay, you got it. Let's see if there's anything else inside of SuperSlicer that you want me to show you guys. And even if that's, hey, print some calibrations, we'd love to see what they look like. I am happy to do that. We can make another video all about it. Again, make sure you're subscribed because, like, literally, on that SuperSlicer video, over 90% of you are not subscribed. And we would love it if videos like this could earn your subscription. If it's not, let me know down in those comments of how we can earn your subscription. That'd be greatly appreciated because we want to produce content that you all will enjoy because I love making content. If there's one thing I do well, it's talk. Like, I actually do that pretty well. You don't believe me? Go watch our podcast. We just interviewed Uncle Jesse, for God's sakes. Go listen to that one when you're done with this one. It's a lot of fun to talk to a guy who's orders of magnitude larger than you that you met randomly in a sushi restaurant in Florida. It's a great story. You'll have to go listen to it. But yeah, that's kind of all I got on this one. I'd love to know what you guys want to see next, whether it's from SuperSlicer, PrusaSlicer, one of the other ones. You all let me know and I'll be happy to make that content for you. But stay safe out there. Don't forget to call your loved ones. It's getting to the holiday season. Don't forget to call your loved ones. And as always, keep making awesome. Have a good one. I did a shitty Mickey Mouse impression. Thank you so much for watching this video, and an especially large thank you to our patrons. Without you guys, none of this would be possible. And if you want to join our Patreon to support our efforts directly, you can do so at patreon.com/3D Musketeers. $5 tier or higher gets your name right in these end credits. Right below me is going to be our original video all about SuperSlicer. So if you missed it, you can go check that out as well. And next to it is going to be our entire series on slicers, so that you can see what else is out there. And hey, maybe go comment on one of those and let me know if you want to get a deep dive on those as well. I will see you guys down in those comments and in the next video. Take care.